Iga Swiatek is standing at the net. She is not moving, she is not talking. She just lost a title she was supposed to defend, and she lost it to a name most casual fans could not spell 2 years ago. Her face says everything her mouth cannot. Shock, confusion, maybe even a little disbelief, because the woman across the net from her is not supposed to be here. She comes from a country with no tennis tradition, no Grand Slam champion before her, no blueprint, no academy back home that could shape a player good enough to reach center court, let alone win on it. And yet here she is, falling to her knees, crying, not out of sadness, out of something much bigger than that. So how does this happen? How does a 21-year-old from the Philippines, ranked outside the top 30, walk onto the most famous court in tennis and dismantle a 3-time Grand Slam champion in straight sets? How does she do it on grass, the one surface she had never even played on against this opponent before? And how does she do it after years of hearing the same quiet doubt follow her from tournament to tournament? Good in the small events, invisible in the big ones. Something changed, something broke through. And to understand what actually happened on that court, we have to go back further than this match, further than this tournament even. We have to go back to a girl with ruffled socks and a grandfather walking her to practice every single day in a country that had no reason to believe she would ever get this far. Because this moment did not start today. It started a long time ago, in a place nobody was watching. Let's talk about where this actually started. Philippines is not a tennis country. There is no academy pipeline. No previous Grand Slam champion to point to and say, if she did it, I can too. No blueprint at all. Eala did not inherit a path. She had to build one from nothing. At 9 years old, she left home to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Mallorca, Spain. 9 years old. Think about that for a second. Most kids that age are worrying about homework and friends. Eala was on a different continent, learning a sport her country barely followed, surrounded by players from places where tennis was already in the blood. She did not do it alone, though. Every single day after school, she trained with her brother and her grandfather by her side. Ruffled socks, high-top shoes, chubby cheeks, as she would later describe herself with a laugh through tears. That image matters. It is not a marketing story. It is the actual foundation underneath everything that happened years later on center court. Her results as a junior gave the first hint that something special was happening. In 2022, she won the US Open girls singles title. She also picked up junior Grand Slam doubles titles at the Australian Open and the French Open. On paper, that looks like the start of a clean rise to the top. But junior success and senior success are two completely different worlds. Plenty of junior champions never make it as professional. The transition breaks careers all the time. Nobody was guaranteeing Eala would be any different. And here is the number that matters. Before this year's Wimbledon, Eala had a Grand Slam main draw record of 1 win and 5 losses. 1. Out of 6 tries at the biggest stages in tennis, she had broken through exactly 1. That is not the record of a rising star, at least not on paper. That is the record of a player who was good, but who kept running into a wall the moment the stakes got real. Every rising talent hits this point, the moment where junior promise has to turn into something proven in front of the whole tennis world, with cameras on you and no more excuses left. For a long time, it looked like Eala might be stuck right there, on the wrong side of that wall. If you have ever watched someone you believed in hit a ceiling they could not seem to break through, you already know how frustrating that feeling is to witness. Now imagine living it, match after match, slam after slam. That is exactly where Eala was standing before this year's Wimbledon. And what came next is the part of this story most people only saw the headline of, without ever understanding how close it came to not happening at all. Let's look closer at exactly how deep that wall went. Take the clay swing of 2026. This was supposed to be Eala's proving ground. Instead, it turned into a string of exits that made the doubters louder. At the Linz Open, she opened with a win, then ran straight into former French Open champion Jelena Ostapenko in the very next round. Ostapenko beat her. Not a shocking result on paper. Ostapenko is a Grand Slam champion, but it followed a pattern that was starting to feel less like bad luck and more like a ceiling. Because here is the detail that stings the most. Against opponents from Czechia specifically, Eala's record stood at 0 wins and 11 losses. 0 and 11. Not against the tour in general. Against one specific country's players, over and over. She simply had no answers. How does a player with this much natural talent lose 11 straight times to opponents from the same country and still be considered a future star? Then came Stuttgart, a tough loss to Leylah Fernandez, another player Eala had the tools to beat on a good day. And in Miami, the site of her breakout win over Swiatek the year before, she was eliminated in the round of 16 with a lopsided 6-love, 6-2 scoreline against Karolina Muchova. Not close. Not a heartbreaker. A one-sided beating on the exact court where her legend had supposedly begun. If Miami was where she introduced herself to the tennis world, this result made it look like the introduction might have been a fluke. Was the Miami win over Swiatek really a signal of things to come, or was it just one great day from a player who still could not solve the sport's toughest tests? That question followed her everywhere, and the media noticed. Quietly at first, then less quiet. The narrative started forming in headlines and broadcast commentary. Great in the smaller events. Great in front of home crowds and lower pressure draws. But invisible once the tournament got bigger and the names across the net got tougher, it is a brutal label to carry. Because it does not say you are bad, it says you have a ceiling. And ceilings are so much harder to shake off than simple losing streaks. Think about what that label actually does to a young athlete. It does not just live in newspapers and social media thread. It lives in the player's own head every single time she walks out for a big match. Every time she faces a seeded opponent on a major stage, she is not just playing the person across the net. She is playing against a story the entire tennis world has already written about her. By the time Wimbledon 2026 arrived, Eala carried all of this with her. The 1 win and 5 losses record at Grand Slams, the 0-11 mark against Czech opponents, the Miami memory that had curdled into a cautionary tale instead of a launching pad, the whispers that she was a great story, but maybe not a great enough player. And then the draw put her on a collision course with the exact kind of opponent this narrative said she could never beat, a defending Grand Slam champion. On a surface she had never faced that specific opponent on before. In the tournament's biggest arena, with every camera and every commentator ready to write the same old conclusion if she lost. If the pattern held, this was supposed to be another chapter in the same disappointing story. Another big name, another big stage, another early exit to file away next to Ostapenko, Fernandez, and Muchova. Nobody watching that draw come out, not the analysts, not the commentators, not even some of her own fans, could honestly say they expected what was about to happen. Because on paper, this looked like a problem Eala simply had not solved yet. And there was no obvious reason to believe Wimbledon would be any different. The score was 9, all in the tiebreak. 2 players who trained side by side years earlier at the same academy, now standing across the net from each other with a Grand Slam round hanging in the balance. This is usually where Eala's story breaks down. This is the exact moment her record said she should crumble. 1 win and 5 losses at Grand Slams did not happen because she lacked talent. It happened because moments like this one had always found a way to slip through her fingers. Except this time, something was different. Swiatek had set point. Then another, 2 chances to close out the set and keep this match on the script everyone expected. Eala saved both, not with panic, not with desperation, with clean, precise tennis, point after point, as if the weight of that 1-5 record simply was not sitting on her shoulders anymore. Here is what nobody tells you about a moment like this. It is not about one shot. It is about what happens in the seconds between shots, when a player has every reason to freeze and chooses not to. Eala later described her mindset in that exact stretch. 1 point at a time, she said. She explained that once you start thinking about the number on the scoreboard, 9-9 or 10-9, that is when you start to crumble a little. So, she refused to look at the number. She looked at the ball. That single mental shift is the twist in this entire story. For years, the assumption was that Eala's ceiling was physical. Not enough power on serve. Not enough weapons against the tour's biggest hitters. But watch that tiebreak closely, and you see the real issue was never her game. It was what happened in her head once the stakes got heavy enough to bend a scoreboard, and on this day, for the first time on this big a stage, her head did not bend. She built a 5-2 lead in that tiebreak through pure aggressive returning. Swiatek clawed back with a 4-point run to reach set point at 10-9. Eala saved it with an unreturned serve, saved another as Swiatek netted a forehand, And on her fourth set point of her own, after 20 points in that single game, Swiatek finally mishit a forehand long. 20 points in one tie-break game to settle a set that had already lasted an hour and 24 minutes. Eala fell to the grass right there. Not because the match was over. It was not. This was only the first set. She fell because she had just done the one thing her entire career had suggested she could not do. She had looked the moment directly in the eye, and she had not blinked. If you've made it this far into her story, you already understand why that tiebreak matters more than any single tournament result before it. This is not just a good set of tennis. This is a 21-year-old rewriting the one narrative that had followed her for years in real time on the biggest court in the sport. I want to know what you think this moment actually says about her. Was this the match where Eala finally proved the doubters wrong? Or is one tiebreak still not enough to erase a 1-5 record built over years? Drop your answer in the comments, because what happened in the second set is going to make that question even harder to answer simply. Because winning that tiebreak was one thing. What Eala did immediately after it is the part of this match that turned a good story into a legendary one. If the tiebreak was the proof that her mind had changed, the second set was the proof that her game had too. Eala walked out for set 2 and did something that should not be possible against a 3-time Grand Slam champion who had just survived a 20-point tiebreak game. She got better. She broke Swiatek's serve to open the set. Love, not a struggle. Not a scrappy hold broken on the fourth deuce. Straight through, clean. Then she pushed for a double break, going up 3-love, hunting return after return with the same aggression that had carried her through the first set. Here is the number that tells the real story of this match. Across both sets, Swiatek committed 44 unforced errors. Eala committed 21. Not a close match statistically. A defending Wimbledon champion made more than double the mistakes of the player she was supposed to be beating comfortably. Remember the old narrative. Great in small events, invisible against the big names. Look at that error count again. 44-21. That is not a player getting outlasted by nerves on the big stage. That is a player imposing her will on a Grand Slam champion, point after point, for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Swiatek did not go quietly. She broke back once, then forced Eala through a 6-deuce marathon in one service game near the end, saving 4 break-back points in a row. For a moment, it looked like the defending champion might drag this into a fight worthy of her ranking. But Eala had an answer for every single one of those break points. And on her third match point of the game, after 17 points in that single service game alone, she hit a sweeping forehand winner across the court that Swiatek simply could not reach. 7-6, 6-2, final score. And remember, this was not a rivalry that started at Wimbledon. 16 months earlier, at the Miami Open, a 19-year-old wildcard named Eala shocked the tennis world by beating Swiatek for the very first time. Back then, she told the crowd she was in complete disbelief, that she felt like she was on cloud 9. That win got filed away by plenty of people as a fluke. A hot day for an unranked wildcard against a champion having an off match. This win at Wimbledon erases that theory completely. 2 wins now in 3 meetings. And here is the detail that makes this rivalry almost impossible to script any better. Both players trained at the same academy, under the same watchful eye of Rafael Nadal himself. There is a photo from Eala's 2023 graduation ceremony at that academy. In it, she stands holding her certificate, with Rafael Nadal on one side of her and Iga Swiatek on the other. 2 students from the same academy, photographed together in celebration. Now separated by a Grand Slam scoreline that nobody would have predicted back when that photo was taken. That is not a coincidence anymore. That is a full circle moment, closing the loop on everything we have been building towards since the start of this video. The 1-5 Grand Slam record, the 0-11 mark against Czech opponents, the whispered doubts about whether she belonged on the biggest stages at all. Every single piece of that old story just got rewritten on the same court, in front of the same cameras that once might have written her off completely. So let's go back to that question we started with. How does a 21-year-old from a country with no tennis tradition walk onto center court and leave a 3-time Grand Slam champion standing there speechless? The answer is not one big secret. It is not one perfect shot. It is a decade of ruffled socks and early mornings with her grandfather, A 1-5 record that could have broken her belief in herself, and a single tiebreak where she finally chose to look at the ball instead of the scoreboard. Iga Swiatek's silence at that net was not just about losing a match. It was about watching a storyline get rewritten in real time, one she had been on the winning side of for years. Eala said it herself right after the win, through tears. She talked about training with her brother and her grandfather after school, about the ruffled socks and the chubby cheeks, about how this moment might look small next to what Serena or Venus or Iga have already achieved. But for a girl who grew up in the Philippines, she said, "This is everything." Then she wiped her eyes and said something that tells you everything about where she is headed next. Being emotional does not mean I am satisfied. Next round, let's go. That is not the sentence of someone who just climbed her mountain. That is the sentence of someone who just found out how tall she is actually capable of climbing. Because waiting for her in the next round is Jasmine Paolini, a former Wimbledon finalist, someone Eala has already beaten once this year. And if she keeps winning, the draw opens up toward a name even bigger than Swiatek, the current world #1 herself. So here is where I leave this with you. Eala just beat the storyline that followed her for years. The question now is whether this was the one signature win of her career, or whether it was simply the first chapter of something the entire WTA Tour is about to have to reckon with. I do not think we know the answer to that yet. Nobody does, not even Eala herself. But if you want to find out alongside me, as this story keeps writing itself match by match, this channel is going to be tracking every single step of it. Subscribe if you do not want to miss where this goes next, because something tells me the biggest chapter of this story has not been played yet.